one. We're gonna do kind of a walk and talk. Is the owner of the car here by chance? Okay, let's start over here with the owner. This is a little bit like we're evaluating his choice of spouse or something. So we got to be a little bit gentle here. So we'll give you the opportunity to tell us just a little bit about your car, so we kind of know what we're dealing with here.
Sure. My name's Jeff Gorey from Colorado. We bought the car on BAT, on Bring a Trailer auction, back in November. I'm, I think, the fifth owner. Originally bought by a doctor in New York. Kept it in his state for a while, then it moved to Michigan. Apparently the PCA president in Michigan owned this for a while. Went on a parade with it. Went down to Georgia, sold to a Microsoft guy up in Seattle. He had a lot of Porsches in his garage and just didn't have room for it. He had to make a move to California. So I bought it from him on that in November and have had it since. Fun car. This is the exact car that used to be on my wall when I was in high school in 1984. And so it was a car that I was looking for a while. It was low mileage, 21,000 miles. Black interior, leather, and pretty immaculate on the inside. We finished second in class this year for the first parade, first time we've ever been here. So we're pretty happy. My son Mario, right there, did a lot of detail work. I appreciate that, Mario. So.
And what year's the car?
It's a 1990 944 S2.
Excellent. Well, welcome. Thanks for bringing it out today. We really appreciate that. Mario, nice job on the detailing. Kind of a fun story. I actually worked at a Porsche dealer when these cars were new, so I got to do some detailing, but they weren't quite as dirty, so it was awesome. They were new cars then. So what we're going to do today, Rob and I and maybe some of our other panelists are going to kind of walk around the car and evaluate the car as we would be looking for it if we were to make a purchase. So the thing about 944s, as we talked about, is a lot of them led pretty tough lives. As they became inexpensive cars, they got neglected, they got passed down, and probably their fair share of hooligans and 16-year-olds had their way with them. The S2s always enjoyed a little bit more respect than the early 944s did, so they sometimes fared better, but again, it's hard to find a good, clean car. He did mention he bought the car on Bring a Trailer. Is everyone here familiar with that site? If you're not familiar with that site, do not ever go there. You will waste years and years of your life. It's like a bad addiction because they turn up some really interesting and fun cars. You never know quite what you're going to see. So this car, of course, is finished in a very classic color combination, guards red over black, which probably was, in this era, at least a third of production. So you can look at that two ways. You can say it's very common, or you can say it's very desirable because it's what everybody wanted. And so, like he said, this car was a poster on the wall. Porsche did a good job marketing this era. Do you guys remember they used to send out a poster and they put a little sticker on there, had your last name on the license plate? Anyone else get those posters in the mail? That's kind of a smart move. A couple things when I'm walking around a car. The very first few things, they ask the question, Manny asked the question, I see a PCA sticker, this is a good sign. To answer that question, I think if someone's a PCA member, it does tell you a little bit about mindset, right? We in the club think that everyone who owns a Porsche is in the club, but some people it's just a car, right? And ideally you want to buy a car that's just not just a car to someone. So the number one thing I'm doing if I'm looking for a car is I'm actually looking at the owner. So before I even look at the car, I'm making some assessment about the owner. How much does the owner know about the car? Are they well educated about what the problem areas of the car? Who have they told me has been servicing the car? What do they have for documentation? Most of you guys probably read Panel. I wrote that article in there about provenance and documentation. So I really want to know, where does this car come from? So he knew where the car came from, who's owned it. BAT does a good job of allowing the audience to kind of vet the car. If I'm at his private home, I'm actually checking out his garage and his landscape. So if you're showing a car, weirdos like me look at that. I always tell people the kind of guy who's going to edge his lawn and mow it two different ways and all his tools have perfect spots and pegboard on the wall. It's a mindset, right? So it's possible you go in and the person's life is totally disorganized and the car is flawless, but it's typically a pattern, right? So I'm kind of looking at all my contextual clues. So I'm going to do a quick walk around on the exterior and see what I see. A couple things stand out to me. The car's got clear film on the leading edge of the fenders and the hood and the bumper. That tells me, hey, someone was concerned about preserving the car. That's always a good sign. I don't have my paint meter with me today, but one of the things I noticed is the car has, at least from here, the correct texture to the paint. These cars were painted with a fair amount of orange peel. I want to see orange peel. It's how the factory painted it. Usually when they've been repaired, painters are proud craftspeople, and so they like it to lay it down like it's glass. Well, that's actually not correct. So usually if I see it, it's too perfect, that's sometimes a sign. A couple things I note, I'll probably ask a question. It's got some aftermarket wheels that I think are made by Speedline. They're a beautiful wheel. They actually bring quite a bit of money. This car would have probably come on a wheel, looks like a Design 90, 16-inch wheel. These I believe are 17s. A couple other little things. Just looking at the car, I can tell someone really likes the car. The car stands up is kind of the term that I use. So I'm kind of excited to kind of do a deep dive. 944 specific, one of the first places I always look is the rear window. As we know, they like to delaminate. The joke used to be, how do you total a 944? Break the rear window. Right. That's no longer true, but they like to delaminate this. A really good friend of mine who's a 944 expert actually gave me a really interesting piece of information. I opened his rear hatch and his hatch struts didn't work. And I said, well, geez, Leif, why is your hatch struts not working? He says, his theory is that it's the pressure over time of the hatch struts on the glass that delaminates it. So he has dead hatch struts in there, go figure. So maybe he was just trying not to look bad. But yeah, my first walk around the car, the paint quality in this car is very, very nice. It's an aesthetic choice. Some people like it, some don't. It's got aftermarket window tint, which actually on a 944 is a good thing because this rear window is like an easy bake oven. I grew up in the back of a 944 and it got hot back there. And usually you'll see the whole back carpet's just cooked on them. So my quick external walk around looks really, really good on the car. The little things I'm looking for, that's how the doors should shut. If you have to shut them multiple times, there's generally something wrong. The gaps on 944s are not quite the same exacting standard that they are on a 911, but they're consistent. So they're bigger than they are on a 911 of similar era. But the door should shut like that. We should have consistent gaps, for example, around the hood, the door gaps, that kind of thing. Walking around the external of the car, nothing stands out. It's got an original secure windshield, which is a good thing. All the rubber and gaskets are nice. The gasket on the sunroof fits well. Those are a bear if you've ever replaced one. No. One other thing I always look at in a 944, which is amazing on this car, these dashes crack like crazy. And this car is an uncracked dash. They'll usually start cracking from the defroster vent, so you can actually do a better inspection looking through the windshield than you can someplace else. So we'll open the door and look in here. A few things worth noting. The other place I'm always going to look for evidence of paintwork would be on any of the edges. So I'm always going to run my finger along the edges to see if there's any rough edge. Or when a painter paints a car, they always have to stop painting somewhere. So when the factory painted them, of course, there was no trim on the car. So if they've ever been repaired, they'll take a piece of masking along an edge like this. They'll fold it back. It's called a back mask. And when they paint and it dries, they peel that off. And usually they don't take the time to wet sand that edge down. So I'm going to look at that. It's a good time to take your flashlight from your cell phone, just put a little light on that edge. Same thing, I'm going to run my fingers on the bottom edges of the doors. Painters are like anybody else. They're always going to do their best work where they think people can see it. So I'm always going to look in places that they can't. Interior-wise, the wear on interiors, 90% of the wear is always on the driver's side for obvious reasons. So I'm going to look at the seat. The seat in this car looks really, really good. It shows almost no evidence of wear on the bolster, which is wonderful. This is just a standard leather car, which means just the seating surfaces themselves are leather. That's an advantage, actually. They wear really well. The vinyl you almost can't wear out. The full leather cars have a little bit more of a challenge. And then little things like the carpet on the threshold looks really, really good. This car, mileage on this car is 21,754 miles, so a very, very low mileage car. And so in a case like this, and this is true of all Porsches of this era with analog odometers, I always tell people, I always suspect the mileage to not be true unless proven otherwise, because they commonly break, they've had multiple owners, and sometimes you don't know. So the first thing that I want to see is the condition of the car consistent with the odometer reading? So when I look at this car and I look at this driver's seat, the goofy term I use is butt polish, right? There's a certain amount of squishing your butt around in a seat over time you just can't erase. and I look at the seat, and someone's butt has not been squishing around for a lot of time in this seat. You look at the threshold as people drag their feet into the car. That carpet there is still soft, right? It's not worn through. I don't want to see the carpet worn through next to the clutch pedal, or the pedal pads to be worn out. So I look at this and I look at the amount of rock chips and road wear, like behind the rockers and stuff. To me, this is consistent with a 21,000 mile car. So, and then of course the other piece I want to look through is the documentation, which if he had it here, we look through that after we inspect the car. So if I were to look at that, then I would say I feel pretty comfortable paying the premium one would pay for a 21,000 mile car. If I look at a car and it says 21 and the seat and the carpet and everything else just, you've been around enough cars, you should look at it and go, it should look really proud, right? Interior wise, dash isn't cracked, seat looks wonderful. It's got an aftermarket, what's called a 930S wheel. That's a very cool wheel. These typically would have had an airbag wheel, and I know this car was equipped with airbag because it's a 90, which was standard equipment by then. So one question, if you were to buy this car, you would want to know is where the airbag wheel is, because someone may want the airbag that came with the car, or at least should know that it no longer has its factory safety equipment. So it's just, I personally can't stand the wheels that came with these, but it's worth knowing. One other cool thing is someone put the new Porsche Classic radio. I could give them a little plug. Other than I hate paying the price for it, it is a damn sexy radio. If you have an early car, there is no better fit inside here, so it's a wonderful thing. One little test on a 944. These hinges always break. This one's actually not broken. He either replaced it or someone's been darn careful. So that's kind of a nice thing. And then just looking around the interior, everything just looks just so. Of course, it also helps he recently Concorded the car. But just a very nice environment to be. I'm not going to do it because we don't have the time, but if I were inspecting the car, as I'm in the inside, I'm going to start trying all the accessories, because everything that doesn't work is just going to factor into how I'm going to evaluate the car. And let's see if his rear hatch release works. They almost never do, but does your hatch release work? Oh, look at that. Sold, I'll take it. So, yeah, they have a little electric hatch release, and it always breaks on one side, so you can only get one side up. Again, I can tell this car's probably had film on it since day one, because look at the carpet, it's crisp and black like it should be. Us Porsche people, we love, I always call them the tchotchkes. These are the things that actually make no difference to the car whatsoever, but Porsche people, if you don't have them, we freak out, right? We want the original toolkit, we want the correct air pump for the car, and it's all present. It's got anyone know what this little thing's for?
Sunroof top.
Yep, it holds the sunroof, because this is not the Dave Kinney special, because this has a very large sunroof, and they pop up or they remove, and that's the bag you put it in to keep it safe when you're traveling. We mentioned documentation. I always love when I see a folder like this. It tells me everything that there is to know about the car. So I've got the original window sticker. I won't go through it all, but it looks to have all the service history. So if I were looking at this car, one of the mistakes I see people make oftentimes is they'll say, oh, there's all this documentation, and they'll just see a big thick folder and they won't look at it. Always take the time to look through it. Even me, I'm a professional at make mistakes. I had a guy tell me, oh, I've got this huge folder, and he showed me a picture of it. It wasn't local. And when the car arrived in the thick folder, it was like 600 pages he printed off Pelican parts of DIY articles and one service invoice. I was like, wow, that is awesome. So I always want to kind of put them in chronological order. And one of the things you'll start doing is you'll start learning about the car, because you'll see what things have constantly been a problem with the car. You'll find out what things haven't been remedied, what things shops typically have recommended that might not have been done. You'll find out, for example, when the timing belt was most recently done on these. As an aside, I believe it's Pano, I hope it is. Had that great article about the 944 tensioner tool. Anyone else see that? So, how that works. So I'm going to learn a lot about the car, and I'm going to learn a lot about the owner. So what I want to see is that they're continually doing stuff over time. What I don't like seeing is where invoices say, told the customer it needs XYZ, repairs declined at this time, repairs declined at this time. Or I see that the same repairs are happening over and over and it's never been resolved. It's amazing how often you'll find that if you look through a history of a car. And then I want to see mileage go up over time. So, the story I tell, I flew to Dallas. I nearly got divorced over this one. It popped up like 2 days before Christmas, and I'm kind of like a hunter for cool things. So this 993 C2S popped up with like 7,000 original miles, really well optioned. And so I told my wife, I said, I'm flying to Dallas, and she was not happy. And I said, it's okay, I'll just fly there, I'll fly back, the car's gonna be great. I get there, and his door isn't even halfway up, and I can just see like the bottom half of the car, and I know I'm in trouble, right? There's more rock chips on this car than any car could possibly have with 50,000 miles. So I'm already not happy, but I decided to look through his service history, and then I note, and I say to him, I said, well, gee, in 2003 it had 7,200 miles, and in 2004 it had 7,200 miles, and in 2005, and then in 2010 there's a service invoice that says, repair odometer. And I said, your odometer didn't work for 7 years. And he goes, well, I didn't drive it much. I just turned on my heel and left. To never be afraid to walk away from something. But yeah, so like I already know this is the kind of owner I want to buy something from. One other kind of fun thing in this era, they came with option code stickers, which will generally be found in the warranty book. Option code stickers came in May of '82. If you're a nerd and you want to know all that fun stuff. And let's see, it's usually stuck in here. And I'm not finding it, so, oh, there it is. So, there's an option code sticker. On 944s and 928s, it'll be in the trunk, down by the spare well. On 911s, it'll be in the front, under the hood, or it should be there. If it's not there, something's wrong. But generally, you'll find it in the maintenance book. And that will tell you the color code of the car, interior color code, like LT for interior is partial leather black. 220 will tell me it's got limited slip. That's kind of a cool thing. Yeah. And only nerds like me can tell you that 220 is limited slip and 454 is the cruise control and all that other fun stuff. But you can decode all that stuff online. So if you don't have a window sticker, it would tell you how the car is optioned. And then it would also tell you if something's incorrect, if you've got the wrong wheels on the car or something like that. So that's kind of a fun one that you can go track down. And again, we're doing kind of an abbreviated one because to give you an idea, I usually would probably spend 3 or 4 hours doing this, but we're going to do the quick version because no one wants to stand and listen to me that long. So we've kind of looked in the trunk. Typically, I'll pull up the carpet too and look in all the spare tire well and all that fun stuff. But let's get to the real business here, which is up front. 2 things. A lot of people will say to me, well, I'm not a mechanic, so what do I need to be looking for under the hood? Number one, you look smart looking under the hood, so that's always a good thing. And 2, the other thing is, you're just looking for anything that stands as out of place. Porsche did not use duct tape. Porsches did not come from the factory with leaks. Sort of obvious things. So the things I'm looking for, number one, would be evidence of collision damage. I'm always looking at the fasteners. How does it look like the fenders have been off? Porsche also never used SAE fasteners. So if you see, SAE fasteners or mismatched fasteners, that's never a good sign. Again, this car already excites me because he has a Porsche battery, which actually they are the crappiest batteries in the world. Sorry, Porsche, but they sure look nice up there. I put one in mine for the show because it looks good. But this is a very, very tidy engine compartment. And again, bring a flashlight. And even if you're not a mechanic, your job is just to be looking for things that stand out. So fluid leaks, smells, if you smell coolant on one of these cars. If you smell coolant on an air-cooled 911, you got a real problem. Just some basic things, I'm going to look at. I always check the oil, and I just get a sense of, what the oil looks like. Air-cooled 911s, 92% of them have the incorrect oil level. That's always a bad sign. And then when I'm here, I'm interacting with the owner and asking, when was the timing belt last done? A lot of shops oftentimes will put a sticker on the timing belt cover that'll sometimes tell you, last service interval. So again, I'm assuming most people are not going to be technicians. So your job is, again, just looking for anything that raises a red flag or a question. So when I look at this car, you can just clearly see, how everything is exactly as it should be. Porsche did not finish out paint in the engine compartments and in the trunk areas to the same standards they did external. So if you ever see a car that the paint looks as good in the engine bay as it does
On the outside of the car, it's clearly been redone too, so there's kind of a fine line. Funny as it sounds, these were built in conjunction with an Audi factory, and the paint in the engine compartment in 944s is actually better than it is in 911s. It's one thing they actually did better than they did on those cars. You'll have a VIN tag up here on 944s. It'll tell you the VIN number on the car. That's always a decent time to run a Carfax. I hope they're not listening to my presentation. They're frankly not worth the paper they're printed on, but people believe in them. And it will tell you something important. And so if there's something negative on Carfax, it's going to radically affect your value. So please know if it's on there. Particularly on a car of this age, they really don't have much great data until it starts with the 2 into the 2000s. But they'll have some spotty. What I just don't want is I don't want something that conflicts with the known history of the car. So I'm going to look for the VIN tag. We also have our color code, guards red. The thing to know about color on Porsche, a big no-no is ever changing the color. So if it says a color different than what it is, that's going to impact its value radically. But again, the little trick I use, because my brain is kind of scattered, I get my cell phone out, and let's say if I see a little bit of leak at the master cylinder or something, I just snap a picture of it, and then at the end of I've done my inspection, I've taken 20 photos. Oh, it needs tires, I'll take a picture of that. It needs this or that, or I notice that there's a leak at the timing chain cover, I'll take a picture of that. And then when I go through it, I have a kind of a review list of things that I noticed. You can take notes, some people take notes, that works fine too, but I find that taking a picture is a really good illustration. And then if I'm really serious, if I want to send it in for a pre-purchase inspection, I can put my list together and say, I looked at it, I think it looks pretty good, these are some things I just have a question about. And they might say, oh no, that's totally normal, or oh no, that's you caught something there. I almost forgot one of the things I'm a big fan of, I always check date codes on tires. So every tire legally is required to have a 4-digit date code on it. So you'll see it'll start with a DOT. The last 4 digits indicate the date the tire was made. So in this case, the 21st week of 2016. So those tires are just over 2 years old, totally fine. I would not drive a Porsche with tires, in my opinion, 6 years is my cutoff. Particularly because I just don't want to be going the speed that I might be driving in a closed course environment, of course, on a tire that's 8, 10, 12, 20 years old. Kind of a sad story. I sold a 993 C4S to a guy who went on a club drive. He bought a 7,000 mile car on original tires and went on a club drive, and they drove in a spirited fashion, let's just say. Had tread separation at speed, went off the road, rolled the car and totaled the car, and luckily was not injured. But in his mind, the tires had plenty of tread, but they were 20 years old, so not a good idea. So typically Porsches, what you'll find 90% of the time is the rear tires and dates back in the fronts are 100 years old, because they always wear out rear tires first. And then I'm going to get down and I'm just going to look at the general condition of the tread. I like the fact it's got Michelin's on it. I hate when I see a car that's got some, I call them May Pops. They may pop, the cheapest tire known to man. It tells me a little bit about the mindset of who owned the car. So if I see some cheap off-brand or mismatched tires, it's not the end of the world, but it gives me some mindset, and it's something I would factor in. So I would snap a picture and say, hey, I'm probably going to end up doing rubber. On any Porsche, I'm also always going to get down on the ground, so typically you wouldn't wear a suit jacket to do this inspection, bring a piece of cardboard or whatever, and I'm going to get underneath the car because, and this one's really unbelievable, I would have liked to judge this car. They always take the brunt of the impact, here, because places, has anyone here ground their car out in the parking lot here? The parking lot is crazy. So one sort of moment's inattention pulling up to a curb stop or a steep driveway, and you can cause some pretty significant damage. So I'm going to look underneath there. While I'm also under there, I'm going to be looking for any sort of leaks. People, particularly the air-cooled 911s, think that they all leak oil. I tell people, most of them do, but that's not the standard, right? The standard is they shouldn't be leaking oil, and so I want to know where. And again, that would come up in the pre-purchase inspection. That's the other advantage of looking at someone's home. You can usually study the ground, the place where the car sits will give you some indication. A lot of Porsche people have a really nice polished garage floor, and you can tell if a car's been sitting there for a while. Always look what's underneath the car. Other stuff I'm going to look through, again, we're going to look through all the documentation, we're going to run its Carfax, and then a really simple and obvious thing is check out the title, and this is a bigger issue. So the thing to know about titles is the person who's selling you the car, where's our owner? Where's the guy right there? So if I'm gonna buy the car from him, I wanna know it's actually his car. So one of the big scams in today's world, one's an old scam and one's kind of a new scam. But one of the old scams is he knows someone who didn't know 944 values have come up in price, and he got it from his neighbor for $6,000, and he just wants to just kind of flip it to me, but it's not actually titled to him, right? He's just gonna hand me a title. So you gotta be kind of careful. I'm always wary, so I just wanna know, like, does he own the car? If I go to his house, that's usually a pretty good idea. Usually people are afraid to have someone over their house if they're not really honest. But I'm also a good friend of Google, so oftentimes I'll just plug the address in, and if his name's Joe Smith, and title says Joe Smith, and Google tells me Joe Smith owns that house, I feel pretty okay. But it's just worth asking a question, right? The other thing to know is, believe it or not all states take title to cars with liens on them. And this didn't used to be an issue when these were inexpensive cars, but now there are people doing collector car financing on stuff. And I've run into situations like Montana, as an example, as a state. The owner still keeps the title when there's a lien against it. So you better make sure if you pay them for the car, you take the car home, and all of a sudden you find out and you go to transfer it to your state, they go, Joe doesn't own the car, it's owned by, XYZ bank. Now you got a problem. So you need to make sure you do a little due diligence there. So that's my basic walk around. At this point, it's a really, really nice car. I feel really good about this car. If I were to grade this car out on a Hagerty scale, this car is probably a 2+, 1-. It's a really, 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 really nice car. One of the nicest ones I've seen in a long time. I would probably then proceed to a PPI with a reputable shop. One thing about PPIs, pick a shop that knows front engine Porsche. These are more specialized. So some Porsche shops aren't as familiar with these cars as they should be. So seek out someone who actually knows what the heck a front engine Porsche should be and what it should look like. And then the other thing is with the shop, be incredibly gracious to them. We're getting, a lot of shops are stopping doing PPIs now because us as a community have not done a very good job to our PPI providers. By that I mean, sometimes when a car fails PPI, I hear about this from my shop friends all the time. A guy calls them out of California, wants to have the car inspected. They call him and say, yeah, there's some things. They say, I'm gonna pass. And then magically they never call back with their credit card number to pay for the inspection. Happens all the time, so please don't be that person. The other thing is then sometimes a shop does you a favor, you do a PPI, 6 months later, the water pump starts leaking, and then someone posts a nasty review on Google and pans a shop. A PPI is one person's inspection of a car at a moment in time. It's not, they're not forensic scientists, they don't have some seer ability to see into the future. It's basically, at that moment, here's the general health of the car, but expect it's a 25-year-old car, stuff's gonna come up, right? So that's kind of my basic thing on PPIs. This is a good car. I would love to own this car, but he probably doesn't want to sell it. So, any other questions about how we might go around a car like this?
How much attention would you pay to looking underneath on your initial inspection?
So, whenever possible, I always want to get it on a lift, but most of the time that's not possible. So, like, I always just have an old piece of carpet in the back of my truck and a flashlight, and I always wear something I'm not afraid to get dirty, and I crawl underneath it. And again, with the thought, if I'm not a mechanic, I'm just looking for things that stand out. Evidence it's been off the road. If they've been a track car, you're gonna find a lot of rubber stuck in all sorts of nooks and crannies underneath. Being a track car isn't a problem, I just wanna know it's been that, because that will factor into my thought process. You can tell if a car's been spun off the road because you can find all sorts of landscape and stuff wedged into suspension bushings and stuff. I only know that because I've spun a few 911s backwards off the road over the years. And you're forever picking grass out of stuff that you never thought grass should be stuck into. I'm going to look for wear patterns on tires. On these cars, I'm going to look at transaxle leaks. I'm going to look for CV joints that are split or leaking. Again, just things that stand out. The other trick of the trade is, and I'm not doing a very good job today because I'm talking a lot, is have the owner talk more than you're talking. So sometimes you'll be making small talk unrelated to the car. Let the owner talk, because usually as people get more comfortable and they get to know you, they'll start telling you stuff they didn't think to not tell you, or you'll find inconsistencies in their stories, right? So it's kind of funny. You'll be talking to someone and you'll be laying underneath and, oh yeah, I know, I've never had an accident, nothing like an issue, and then you'll be like, oh man, there's all this, looks like it got scraped underneath, and it's like, oh, well, there was that time I slid off the road and went into the ditch. And maybe they just forgot too, you know, but just the longer you're with someone, it's amazing what they'll open up and tell you. So just be listening. So that's what I'm looking for underneath the car. Yeah.
Does it matter to you if someone says, I run exclusively non-ethanol fuel in a car, or does that matter to you on how you think the engine's degraded or any of that, or hoses or any of that stuff?
So that's a great question. So ethanol, for us car people, we think is a bad thing, right? Ethanol attracts water, it's hydroscopic. You know, part of it depends on the era of the car and the mileage usage. So a car of this era, by this era they have a sealed fuel system. They don't suck moisture out of the air in quite the same way like an older carbureted car, even a CIS car, which is open vent. But because of its low mileage, you know, I would be concerned about fuel quality in a car like this. So I don't think it's a break point, but what it does, it tells me a mindset. The kind of person who is willing to drive 10 miles across town and knows the difference, it's going to parlay into other parts of the car. But frankly, if someone's got a new Panamera with 40,000 miles, I don't really care. I mean, it's running enough fuel through there, it's not an issue. It's when it sits that it's a problem.
What about your drive around? Do you start it and drive it, or?
Yep, so as far as a drive, basic rules, I never ever do it at night. I try not to ever do it in traffic. And then the other thing is I always have the owner drive the car first.
Right.
The reason I do that, number one, I want to see how they drive the car, right? The funny story, I had an original owner, I looked at a 3.2 Curve cab, this guy was the original owner on, very low mileage car, and we started the car up stone cold, and he's telling me what a great car this is, how much fun it is to drive, and before we can even get to the end of the street, he's bouncing out the rev limiter, and he's shifting it like a rock crusher in a muscle car, and oh, people say these 915s are hard to shift, you just gotta muscle them. And I didn't know really what to say, so I thought, well, I'll just go on this test drive. So we do the little test drive, and I switch to get in there, and the car has mileage in the teens, and it has a gearbox on a 915 that feels like it's got 150 on it, right? So that told me all I needed to know about the car, right? I mean, no one who loved the car would drive it like that, right? So that's one reason I always have them drive first. The other reason I have them drive first is when you're not focused on driving, you can hear and feel, you know, vibrations, noises, rattles, you know, things that are not correct about the car. And then also while they're driving, you can be trying all the switches and buttons and all that kind of stuff. Your job is to kind of ferret out all that information. So, you know, don't have the radio on. Even if it's hot out and doesn't have AC, I still close the windows and sunroof because I want to be able to hear. You know, if I got all that road noise, if it's a Cabrio, the top's always up. If it's a Targa, please, 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 please put the Targa top on. Because the worst thing in the world is a Targa top that doesn't fit well, because you will hate yourself. I can't tell you how many people have bought a Targa, and you know, the Targa sits up like this high, and they wonder above 40 miles an hour, it's like riding in a jet. And they go, oh, all Targas are like that. No, they're actually not. You just have a bad one. So put all that stuff in there, and then use the car as you would use it. Don't drive it around the block. Take it on. Don't be a jerk and take it for an hour, but drive it enough that over a bunch of surfaces. Let them drive. You try everything out. And then when you get in the car, again, use the car in a variety of circumstances. Take it up to speed, take it out on the highway, take it some low speed stuff, you know, take it to parking lot, spin it in circles, make sure everything sounds good, right? Not spin in circles, that's the wrong word, but I mean like drive in a slow circle so you can hear like the CV joints if they're clicking, or, you know, if there's any things like that. And again, please try everything, and if something doesn't work correctly, never assume it's something simple, right? The funny thing people always say, like I talked to a guy yesterday, well, the dealer says the air conditioning just needs a charge. I go, okay, fair enough. Devil's advocate, I'm selling a car, I want to get top dollar for a car. If all the car needed a charge on a 105-degree day in Missouri, with each Porsche of this era, if the AC doesn't work, assume $3,000 is going to evacuate out of your wallet. I mean, just, because again, getting back to the divorce thing, my wife would leave me if we drove in Missouri at 105 with no AC. I mean, it's like part of the marital decree. We like went through the whole thing, and she's like, car with no AC, Missouri, we're done. Sicker for poor, or over 100, no AC, we're out. So, any other questions about walk around? Oh.
Question on the newer cars with the ODB2.
Yep.
Do you bring a scanning tool like a Duramatric or something, plug it in and read? Have you ever had issues with owners telling you, I don't want you to do that?
Oh, so it's a great question. So, OBD2 stands for Onboard Diagnostics 2, which was introduced by the federal government in 1996. So it's not a Porsche standard, it's what Chevy, Ford, everyone has this standard. Okay, and basically the federal government says we want to be able to monitor compliance with emissions primarily, and so we want to be able to see what's happening to the health of the car. So in this era, with the Motronic, it has about the processing power of your old Timex, right? Today's modern car has more processing power than some of the supercomputers back in the 80s. I mean, it's mind-boggling, right? So modern cars will store lots of useful information. So to answer your question, would I carry a Duramatric? Yes. But the average enthusiast, no. So that would be something I would probably either ask if they have access to, or that would be part of the PPI. But what you're looking for when you scan the car would be, okay, what sort of faults are in the car? It will also tell you when it was all last cleared. So when I go in there, what I don't want to see is that someone cleared all the fault codes 10 minutes ago. That's a really bad sign, right? And again, they'll always have some answer. Well, the battery just went dead before you came, and so magically they all went away, right? So they have what they're called readiness codes. So there's a process the car becomes basically ready. And so you want to make sure, first and foremost, all the readiness codes are set. And any good PCA shop will know this. So make sure all the readiness codes are set. And then the big things people want to see primarily on the manual transmission and GT cars are what they call over-rev histories. So because we're Porsche people, we're enthusiasts, we like to take our new, say, 996 twin turbo out at the track, and as we're barreling down the back straight at $150, we tried to downshift from 6th to 5th, we clipped it to 3rd, and we spun it to 11,000 RPM, and then we thought, it's making this weird lower end kind of clanging and banging. And so, but no worries, it's under warranty. So we drive it to our local Porsche dealer, they plug it in and say, sorry Tom, looks like you had a little bit too much fun an hour ago, and thanks for playing, but we are not repairing your motor. That's basically what they put the over-rev history in there for, right? So it stores your bad behavior. So on the early cars, 986, 996s, it just has stage 1 and stage 2. The enthusiasts have learned this, and so now they want to know, right? So stage 1 is generally like, in those cars, it's hit the rev limiter. Stage 2 is something over the rev limiter. And you can hit the rev limiter basically only a couple ways. One's a miss shift, right? And the other way is you can rev it and idle. Some guy's sitting at a show revving his car up. You can actually do that. 997, 997 and newer, they got smarter, and they have 6 ranges, right? So 1 would, for example, be the soft limiter. Stage 2 would be the hard limiter. And almost all the cars will show some 1s and 2s. What you don't want to see is a lot of 3, 4, 5s, and 6s. And you can look all those graphs up online. They'll tell you how many revs you hit and that kind of thing. It's serious enough that Porsche, if they pull a DME report like that, there's a threshold at which they won't no longer CPO a car, right? So you want to pull it because it's going to affect your long-term value on the car. And then the other thing to know is you want to know how recent it was. So for example, if I see an over-rev, and it's not a great when I see a stage 4 over-rev, let's say it happened when the car had 40 hours and the car now has 4,000 hours on it, it's not likely that it would have caused an issue at this point. I can probably filter on that. Just fun story for you. I had a customer who consigned a car with a dealership I won't name, but he had someone who wanted to PPI the car. They drove it to a shop that a friend of mine owns. And when they pulled the over-rev, what they found out is all the over-revs happened on the drive over from the dealership to the shop. So whoever the lot kid that drove it over had a hell of a time. Yeah, so, yeah, because it'll show you the exact time in which the over-rev happened. So you're like, oh, interesting, right? So just be careful if you're going to lend your car to your 16-year-old kid. Thankfully, when I was a kid, my dad had Porsches without that kind of monitoring, right? Any other questions that you'd ask? Well, good. Tomorrow we're going to be doing at the Tech Academy. I'll be talking, and we'll be talking about
the state of the market in kind of a broader sense and what the cars are doing, so we'll have that too. And if you have any questions, feel free to come find me. I'll be here through tomorrow. So, you want to say anything, Rob, or anyone else?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Beautiful.
Thank you.